This is a sample chapter from Fitton Books.
Chapter 3, Brinson, Nevada, June 17, 1882, 12 p.m.
Buy me a drink, Marshal?
Asked Suzette, adjusting the red fringe around her ample breasts. She was missing a tooth in back, but her dark eyes brought in the men. Not now.
You're still chasing the
Pudgy bartender, his mustache waxed and curled at the corners, and his greasy hair parted in the center, wiped down the glossy bar with a clean linen rag.
Hey, Jake, what do you have?
What do you got, Orville? Orville removed an oblong green bottle with a bright yellow label from the back shelf.
I just got in this case of stuff from San Francisco. Smooth bourbon. What do you say?
Fill it.
How was your trip back east, Jake? You catch that rustler?
Nope. He placed both hands on the wood bar and panned the liquor bottles. Wild goose chase, brother. I ain't so sure there was rustlers out at the Comstock Ranch. Orville nodded, opened the bottle, and filled the shot glass.
What's this about somebody fiddling with them telegraph wires? Andy Bisbane says they're still down. That ain't the big news.
Orville plunked the stubby glass and then the bottle on the shiny bar. Jake lifted the glass and poured the bourbon down his throat. It was smooth, just like Orville said, real smooth.
Well?
Asked Orville, crossing his arms. Good stuff, brother, good stuff. He leveled himself out another shot as Orville leaned forward and whispered across the bar.
You picked a fine time to be out of town, Jake. There was a wreck and silver stolen north of Arroyo Canyon yesterday. Tracks with dynamite.
Yeah, I was told. I reckon to look into it. Oversized mammoth of a man with scissor-sniped hair and a horse mouth opened his blue eyes wide as he set an empty glass on the bar. In his fringed leather coat, he stood a full 6 inches taller than Jake.
I was rounding the bend up near Restriction Mountain looking for food.
What did you see, Sawtooth? Asked Jake.
Not what I see, Marshal. What I heard. Round, she was a-shaking.
He opened his eyes wide and pointed into the air.
Tell me it wasn't them sons of bitches blowing up the 924 on the way to Carson City.
You been out there, Sawtooth? Asked Jake.
Nothing left out there. Nothing, Jake. Nothing.
Orville poured him more bourbon, and Sawtooth took giant steps across the bar. He sat at the corner table with Annette Bailey, the most petite dancer in the saloon. I think she's taken her life in her hands, being with Sawtooth. Jake held his shot glass halfway. Then he set the drink on the bar and pointed at Orville. Railroad ain't saying much about the wreck. Andy's last wire said there's a railroad man coming in. Silver was headed to U.S. Mint, Carson City. I intend to go out to the wreck presently. It happened in my town. It's my responsibility.
Silver's real important now, Jake. The government's buying it up.
It's mandated now, Orville. I read in one of the Virginia city papers that Congress just made it a law 4 years ago. The U.S. Treasury is required to buy silver. The president vetoed it, but the goddamn Congress overrode it.
Sawtooth says you know the president.
Jake swigged more bourbon and gazed over at Sawtooth and Annette. Hayes commanded the Ohio boys, about 1,000 at the beginning. Hell, Hayes convinced us to wear all them damn government uniforms. Don't know nobody that knows the president. It ain't no big deal, Orville. He pointed at the bartender. Haven't seen him since they reviewed the armies in Washington when the war ended. Didn't know him back in Ohio. He was involved in politicking. He never did nothing for me. Congressman from Ohio was the one who wrote the letter that got me the deputy's job in Elko. Before that, I was punching cattle in Texas. Left just before the Hoodoo Wars. All hell broke loose back there. You want to talk about real rustlers? Talk about the Hoodoo Wars. Jake stared at his mustache image in the smoky mirror. Then he thought about the wreck. Damn heads will roll if the government finds out that silver's been stolen. Well, soaring bird in the Shoshone, they saw the wreck. Indians were looking for food. I know that too. Orville leaned toward him again and lowered his voice. Everybody's headed out to Soroil, just like Sawtooth says, but the area was deserted. I don't understand that. Somebody at the hotel told Jim Coltrane the railroad's offering a reward. Ain't heard nothing about no reward. Coltrane says the freight car was stuffed with silver bars. Stuffed, Jake, stuffed. That silver is the property of the U.S. government. Yep. I need to talk to the U.S. Army men or the passengers, maybe the engineer, said Jake. I don't know nothing about the passengers. Ain't seen none of them in here. I tell you, they're all gone. Gone where? Asked Jake. Don't know. I don't like it, Orville. I'm heading out there. A lanky woman, brown hair tucked under a black hat, strutted like a well-formed Mustang through the swinging cafe doors. Like a man, she wore a short-barreled Colt in her side holster. Jake eyed her tight, dark breeches and new chaps, but stopped at her smooth face and luminescent eyes. She sauntered over to the table like a tumbleweed blowing into town, turned a chair around and faced Gene Hawkins from the Turner Ranch. Pam Grayson, what the hell is she doing back in town? I heard she was working on the Turner Ranch, the sheep among the wolves. Those Turner boys, she ain't no sheep. She can hold her own, brother. She can hold her own. Jake filled the glass, but let it sit on the counter. Pam looked wilder in her dusty garb and wispy wind-blown hair. She could reel in a man with a wink of an eye. She never bought fancy dresses or silk stockings from the city boutiques. She could punch cows just as well as the men. Jake was attracted to her seductive, earthy eyes, but she was selective in choosing her men. She sat with Hawkins and a bunch of rowdy ranch hands at the table across the room. They ordered up a drink for her. 2 months ago, she had left for Texas, and rumors said she was with Kid Curry for a time. Jake was surprised to see her back. She's fine, real fine, said Orville. As an old 49er, Albie always says she ain't no petticoated astonishment. No, she ain't. Speak of the devil. Jake turned as Albie crashed through the front doors. His deputy, worn green leather hat crunched into his thick mass of gray hair, raised his finger and slipped around the tables. His voice was high-pitched and annoying. Jump in Jerusalem, Marshal! Jump in Jerusalem! Well, what is it, Albie? Albie reeked of body odor and stale whiskey. He grunted and spit a mass of tobacco juice toward the brass spittoon. Marshal! Dan Dalton! Dan Dalton! Calm down, Albie. What the hell's under your skin? Albie's dark eyes opened wide as he spoke. He curled his top lip and exposed 2 missing teeth as he jumped up and down like a monkey. They want to string up Dan Dalton! Dan Dalton? Jake glanced at Orville and stepped off the bar stool. The Turner boys! They got him out at the Dunbar Ranch! Somebody shot Tom Dunbar! Shot him in the back! Shot in the back! Curtis don't give a damn about the law, said Orville. This ain't another one of your wild stories, is it, Albie? I tell you, Tom Dunbar, they shot the bastard in the back. Is he alive? I just don't know. They shot him in the back, Jake. Shot him in the back. Jake plucked out a silver coin and flipped it onto the bar. It spun around like a top, and Orville scooped it up. He tipped his hat to Orville and plowed behind Albie through the saloon, but made eye contact long enough with Pam Grayson to send a burst of energy through his gut. Albie parted the cafe doors. The sunlight stung his eyes as his boots hit the boardwalk. Menawa, his black coat sheeny in the daylight, remained hitched near his office across the street. His horse snorted twice when he saw Jake. He stepped across the prairie dirt, unhitched Menawa, and climbed into the smooth leather saddle. Dan Dalton, a quiet man, washed dishes at the Coltrane for years and didn't even carry a gun. Jake gave Menawa a spur kick and the horse galloped down the street through town. The Turners were powerful enough to lynch Dalton. He followed after Albie's crooked-leg horse Willie in a swirl of dust. Why would the Turners do something stupid like hang Dan Dalton? Under the gray cliffs, in the shadow of the distant Sierras, Menawa leaped over a small gulch and scrambled up the sandy sage-covered slope. Jake leaned forward in the saddle, gripping the reins as he chased Albie and Willie along the ridge to the Dunbar Ranch near Hammer Creek. He gazed south towards Arroyo Canyon, carved deep in red into the flatland. Clouds formed along the horizon above Arroyo. The vague outlines of the jackknife train appeared like a broken line across the molted brown plains. The engine and 2 cars remained on the track. He slowed and removed his field glasses from the saddlebag. The engine marked 924 near the smokestack sat on the prairie like a lonely buffalo. He swung the glasses to the left. The twisted tracks outlined a substantial crater in the desert floor. A stock car was open near the jackknife section. Where were the passengers, the engineer, and the crew, or even the U.S. Army? To the west, jagged foothills led toward the higher peaks, silhouetted against the open blue sky. After he investigated the Dalton thing, he'd head out to the wreck. Elton Dunbar built his log ranch after the war under Freeman's Ledge. Hammer Creek flowed quickly about 200 yards beyond a long line of lofty oaks and manzanita. Everything went to his son when Elton died a few years back. Tom moved from Mississippi and maintained the house with his family. He raised a few head of cattle, minded his own business, and had no battles with the Turners. Now he was dead. Jake slowed Menawar along the cascading creek. A dozen people had gathered under the tree clump ahead. The burly Rhodey Turner moved wildly on his black steed in front of the boisterous crowd, trying to move them back. A thick hemp noose dangled in the midday sun from a bare branch extending toward the creek. Dan Dalton, his hands tied behind his back, stood next to the dark stallion. Jake pulled out his Colt and fired into the air. Albie, never missing an opportunity to create commotion, fired both his revolvers upward. The crowd turned and Menawar galloped into the encampment. Fat Junior Turner quickly looped the noose over Dalton's neck. Jake fired his gun again and pulled back on the bridle. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Junior?" "This man killed Tom Dunbar," said the unshaven Mike Turner, standing to the right. All his brothers looked the same, dark eyes and hair, beard stubbled faces, and pig snout nose like the old man. Heavier Junior walked up to Jake. "Well, shot him in the back." Mary Ellen Dunbar, her brown hair a tangled mess in the breeze, held her two children back in the crowd. "He killed my husband." "You ain't gonna let some murdering bastard go free, are you, Marshal?" asked Rhodey, the eldest and most arrogant of the three Turner boys. "Well, I don't intend to." "Good, that's what we wanted to hear." Rhodey turned toward the bug-eyed Junior. "Loop that noose around the son of a bitch." Jake vaulted off Menawar and drew his gun squarely in front of Rhodey's beady eyes. "Belay that, Junior. This man is going back to my jail." "So, the Marshal won't serve justice," said Rhodey, stepping back to Junior. "What's the matter, Marshal? Worried about what the judge might say when he comes to town?" Jake, with his gun still drawn, trailed the smaller Rhodey across the dirt. This wouldn't be the first time he shot somebody threatening his manhood. "You can talk plainer than that, brother." Rhodey stared at his gun hand and looked at Junior and Mike. "Don't try nothing!" cried Albie, his guns pointed at the other Turners. Jake sensed fear in Rhodey's little eyes. Rhodey looked back to Junior and waved his arm. "Let him go." "Now why don't you and your brothers get back to your place and you tell Sam how you're out here this morning trying to string up a man without a fair trial?" "Well, Pa is furry," said Junior. "Shut up, Junior," yelled Mike. "You haven't heard the last of this, McBride," said Rhodey. He and his brothers strode together back to their horses beyond the trees. Jake turned to Albie and then they mounted up. "Bring him in, Albie." "Close call, Danny, close call," said Albie. Turner horses produced a dust cloud along the creek. The brothers crossed at the ford and headed west under the high clouds. Albie pulled out his glistening Bowie knife and sliced the rope around Dan Dalton's wrist. Mary Ellen, clutching her children, wept as Dalton, only in his early 20s, staggered forward and meekly stood in front of Jake. Jake did not see guilt in his blue eyes. "What happened, Dan?" "Well, I rode in, Marshal. I came to borrow Tom's saw. Talked about it yesterday at the Aurora. I got witnesses." "You rode in and what happened?" "I found him dead on the floor. I run out just when his wife and kids come up in their carriage." Jake stroked his chin and studied Dan's glassy eyes. You killed Dunbar, Dan? No. Okay. Jake checked the clearing back to the house. You'll have a chance to prove yourself when Judge McKenzie comes to town. Albie, bring him back and lock him up. Will do, Jake, will do. Jake turned to the neighbors. You men, Griffin and Early, ride back to town with him. The Turner boys had disappeared over the yellow grazing land across the river. They rode out here to seek their own kind of justice, and Jake wanted to know if Sam Turner knew about it. As Albie and the others marched Dan Dalton away from the clearing, Jake meandered through the crowd to Mrs. Dunbar.
Marshal, are you sure you did the right thing?
Asked Newton Corey, one of the old miners. Yeah, I did the right thing, Newton.
Marshal Tuckerman, he would have...
I don't care about Tuckerman. Dalton will be proved either guilty or innocent at his trial. He looked into Mrs. Dunbar's washed-out red eyes. You heard what I said, Mary Ellen. If Dalton killed your husband, he'll hang. Tom was a good man, Marshal. He made it all the way through the war, and now to be shot in the back at his own place. You make sure that Dalton hangs. She cried on the bushy-haired Grace Whitman's shoulder. The kids looked up at Jake with wide, tearful eyes. Growing up without a father was not fair. Jake spun back to the crowd. Did anybody see what happened out here?
I'm the one who saw it, Dalton,
said Newton, moving his mouth around his beard.
saw the whole damn thing.
What are you telling me, Newton? You saw Dan Dalton shoot Tom Dunbar?
Well, not,
He tightened his bushy white brows and scratched his head. I didn't think so. I think you and Albie softened your brains drinking in the mining camps a long time ago. Jake faced the crowd. You listen to me, all of you. I'm getting sick and tired of you people accusing Dan Dalton of things you think he did. You were about to string him up because Newton thought Dalton shot Dunbar. Man's innocent till proven guilty.
But I saw him coming out of the house,
cried Newton.
He run from the house and left in a gallop.
Well, so what? Jake put his hands on his hips. Back along the creek, a single brown horse pulled a surrey toward the grove. Now, who the hell is this? Jake took a few steps forward. The aging Doc Talmadge and Jim Coltrane sat in front. He brought the carriage to an abrupt stop. The mustached Coltrane, in his San Francisco vested blue suit, his black boots still spit-polished clean, leaped out first. He rushed across the clearing ahead of Talmadge.
Jake, I heard Tom Dunbar is dead. If you think Dan Dalton killed him, you're dead wrong.
You heard correctly, Jim. He is dead. And Dalton was outie. The unkempt Doc Talmadge stumbled around the horses. Afternoon, Doc.
Yes, that'll be along the way, Jake. Dalton do it?
Damned if I know, said Jake. He motioned for Jim and Talmadge to follow him into the barn. Dunbar's tools hung neatly along the barn wall, and his horses ate hay inside the stalls. Jake rubbed the darker horse's snout. Good fella. Jim held his arm.
I have one question for you, Jake.
Well, what's that? Talmadge passed a silver whiskey flask among them.
No thanks, Doc. Dan Dalton worked in my kitchen at the hotel. I don't ever recall that kid wearing a gun, Jake. I can't believe he would just come out here and shoot Tom in the back.
Stranger things have happened, Jim, said Jake, wiping the whiskey from his mouth, and he handed the flask back to Doc. Come on, let's go in the house. Jake studied the dirt as they crossed the yard. He traipsed across the porch and stepped inside. Across the clean swept floor, Tom Dunbar, a mass of curly hair spread on the floorboards, was face down under his stony fireplace. One precise round hole had pierced his dark vest. Talmadge checked the body while Jake walked through the house.
What's this?
Jake turned. Looks like a saw to me, Jim.
Yeah, but what's it doing here on the floor? All the other tools are hanging in the barn.
I don't know. Jake faced Talmadge. Any other wounds, Doc?
Nope. One shot. From behind. Very precise. I'd say he never knew who killed him. I reckon he's been dead 3 or 4 hours.
The whole thing bothered Jake. Whoever shot Dunbar in the back did not want to be seen and wanted him dead quick. Dan Dalton did not even own a gun, and why would he be so yellow as to shoot Dunbar in the back? Jake set down the saw on the table. Because the rest of the tools were still in the barn, maybe the saw had something to do with Dunbar's killing. And the wires are up. I'm sending a wire to the judge about this.
Good move. Let the judge try Dalton, but I say with Sam Turner's boys involved in this, I'd keep your ass out of this,
said Doc. I want this thing handled the way it's supposed to be handled. The sunshine blinded his eyes for a second. Near the barn, Talmadge and Jim continued to discuss the shooting. He walked down the length of the porch. Several greasy scuffs covered the outer boards. He bent down and raised his finger through what smelled and looked like creosote. He ducked under the rail and stepped into the yard. Boot prints rounded from someone running began at the porch and formed a trail in the dirt toward the cattle pens beyond. Another set of prints almost paralleled the first trail, along the horseshoe marks near the corral. Someone had dismounted from a horse, headed onto the porch, and then returned. He followed the horse trail along the fence toward the open range. The horse had come and gone from the east. Amidst the sand grains, stray grass blades and pebbles, and alternating bright reflections shone in the dirt. He marched forward, reached down and picked up a spent Remington shell. Then he gazed across the long stretch of range. Anyone riding in from the desolate eastern land would be riding some distance. He stuck the shell in his vest pocket and headed toward Dunbar's barn.
You find something out there, Jake?
He reached into his pocket and placed the shell between his fingers.
This.
Could be anyone. No, someone with creosote on his boots. A rider came in from the east, hitched his horse away from the house, next to the cattle, and then sneaked up the side porch, but his boots scraped them boards.
You better check Dalton's boots.
Andy says an overland railroad man, John Rheingold, should be arriving soon on the evening stage. He reserved a suite,
said Coltrane. Jake stroked his chin. He said this man is named John Rheingold. Can't place him, but why would a railroad man be arriving on a stage and not on a train? Jim, I'm riding down to Arroyo. Why don't you and Doc come with me? Coltrane looked over at Talmadge.
You won't find nothing, Jake.
What are you saying, Doc? Asked Jake.
Train's empty.
Train's empty? This thing happened yesterday morning. You're telling me in 30 hours the silver and the passengers are gone?
Guess the engineers got them passengers on wagons to Carson City.
Well, he's not in town. As a matter of fact, I was prepared to get rooms ready. And we find out the passengers are all gone.
When the hell did the silver disappear?
Don't know.
Well, damn, where's the engineer? Asked Jake. Jake looked toward the brown ridges folded against the wide blue sky, blocking the view to Arroyo Canyon. You coming with me?
Yeah, we'll go.
In the shaded grove, the parson had arrived and comforted Mrs. Dunbar and their children. To the east, Jake could see the old mines burrowed into the distant rock knolls. Someone rode to the Dunbar ranch from that direction, and Jake reasoned it was not Dan Dalton. If he and Elby had not arrived when they did, Dan Dalton would be swinging from the tree branch back in the grove.